Okay, I think that solved the problem. Whew. All right. So can folks hear me? I hope so. Hi, everybody. Okay, yes, I got a yes that I am hearable. Wonderful. All right, so hi, everyone. Welcome to the Health and Wellness Summit. I'm Jenny Bernstein. I work over in health promotion. And so I'm really excited to introduce Daniel Trolaro and Jamie Glick today. They will tell you a little bit more about what they will be talking about today and a little bit more about themselves. But just wanted to remind everybody, please keep yourself on mute, and I will monitor the chat through the session, pass along any questions at the end of the session, and the presentation slides and handouts should be available later, as well as we'll send a Qualtrics survey to provide feedback. If you have questions, I will put my email as well in the chat, and if I can't answer your questions later on, I can at least direct them to the right person. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Dan and Jamie.
Fantastic. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having us today. Nice little hybrid session. We have some in-person, we have virtual. Thank you. We're going to be moving quickly because I know we're starting just a few minutes after the intended start time of 12, and we have a lot to cover today in a short period of time. My name is Dan Trolaro. I'm from New Jersey, so I'm not from Colorado. So if I talk quickly or sound funny, that's the reason. So I'm happy to be here. Just a quick introduction. I'm the head of prevention for Epic Risk Management, which is a global gambling harm minimization company. And we do a lot of work within the college community, within the college campuses, with athletes, non-athletes, as well as with pro sport, MLB, NFL, et cetera. And some of what we're seeing is a rise in participation of gambling amongst our emerging adults. And this is something that's very concerning as we start to see more sports betting apps, especially in Colorado. And today, for the next 40 minutes or so, Jamie and I will be taking the time to kind of go through what we're observing, what the concerns are, and we'll also approach it for a bit through a bit of lived experience, because I'll share with you a little bit about my journey in the world of gambling as I started my journey of recovery back February 11, 2010, over 13 years ago, just so we can kind of humanize the aspect. But I'm also here and actually honored always to be with Jamie Glick, Colorado resident, and I'll turn it over to him.
Hey everyone, I'm Jamie Glick. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, licensed addictions counselor. I've been in the addiction space for 6 to 7 years. I was never trained on problem gambling, and I started to receive different clients with that challenge. And I think I was moderately effective, but there were some tools that I just didn't know about or didn't have access to. And so about a year ago, I became more aware of all the different tools that are available. I got connected with the Problem Gambling Coalition of Colorado, and have been able to really learn a lot and earn a certification, the process of the certification. And we just want to spread some of that awareness today. This is an exciting time for CU in the sports world. I was listening to Sports Talk Radio on the way here, and there was more people who watched the CU Nebraska game than even the Alabama-Texas game, which was on prime time. So you all are getting a lot of attention. And it's a very, very exciting time to be on the campus, I'm sure. As far as betting goes, there are more bets placed on the CU Nebraska game than any week 1 NFL game, which is just astonishing. I've never heard anything like that. And we're not here to be party poopers. We're pretty exciting guys. I think we're fun to be around. But I think that with all that betting, with all that gambling, there's going to be some unintended consequences. I know that for sure, actually. As a therapist, I work with people who struggle with problem gambling, and I work with college students who struggle with problem gambling. And for many people, it's really causing a disruption to their life. So that's a big part of why we're here, and thank you for having us. If you get a chance, we do have QR codes. Part of our process is to collect data. And so we're very data driven in what we do. So there's just 4 questions. So if you have a moment, whether you're in person or if you're virtual, we would appreciate you taking the time to answer these 4 questions. I'll pause for about 30 seconds so you can do this. All right, as we share this information, there may be some information that's sensitive to those who are in recovery. There's also gonna be some discussions around 9/11. So if at any moment you feel a certain type of way, you feel triggered, please step out of the room. If you're at home, step away from your computer, do whatever you feel like you need to do to take care of yourself. So I first want to define gambling because we use that word a lot and we need to be clear on what that means. And this is the best definition of gambling that I've found. And that's just risking something you have in hopes of gaining something you don't have when the outcome is uncertain. And oftentimes I'll pull from the audience and say, hey, what may qualify for gambling that we don't often think about? Because we think about slot machines, we think about poker games, but there's other types of gambling that exist that we oftentimes don't think about. Even people who place bets on sports from their phone oftentimes don't consider that gambling. And there's a lot of other folks who, if there's games of skill, they think that's more skill and not necessarily taking a gamble. Okay? We'll talk sometimes about day trading. That's another form of gambling. And so it's a pretty broad definition, but that's by design. Because there's a lot of things that are gambling that we don't always consider gambling. And really gambling is everywhere. And I just have some pictures that I'm just gonna go through quickly, because these are, when you think about yourselves, you think about college students, these are the messages that they're getting consistently. If you're watching a sporting event, you cannot watch a sporting event without constant ads pulling you in to gamble on that game, gamble on other sports. Offering, they're not allowed to say free anymore, but offering free incentives, free money, bet $1, you'll get $200. Like, if you're a young person, maybe, even someone my age, if someone says, hey, give me $1, I'll give you 200 back, that gets your attention, right? And, I'd like to show this one because this is from a casino. All types of colors and sounds and all types of stimulus just to get your attention. The second picture is pretty funny, the one on the right, because that's actually a game, Dave and Buster's. And so even young kids, we're pulling them in, we're attracting them to this gambling behavior. And again, just pictures, fun, money, alcohol, just everyone having a great time. These are the images that we're seeing that represent gambling. Even these are ads around town, some of them at colleges and universities, and you may recognize one of them. So just a brief history of gambling in the United States. I think this is important, especially what's happened recently. So in 1931, commercialized gambling was legalized in Nevada. 1975, first sports book opened in Las Vegas. 1988, Congress passed the Indian Gambling Regulatory Act, which allowed Native American tribes to open casinos. And then the National Indian Gaming Commission was established. That was a big deal. 1992, Congress passes PASPA, prohibiting states from offering or allowing sports betting except for Nevada. So this is kind of moving in the opposite direction. And then 2018, U.S. Supreme Court overturned PASPA and legalized sports betting at the federal level. And that was a big deal. That number 5 was a big deal. It just opened it up. And it's not on the slide, but in 2020 is when Colorado legalized online gambling. But presently, gambling legal in 36 states, estimated 100 billion wagered legally in 2022, sports betting legal in 33 states, online betting legal in 24 states. So as you can see, from 1931 to about 2018, not a whole lot of movement. 2018 to now, a lot of movement. Just, I know we have people from all over the country. This gives you a kind of an indication of, I know we're in Colorado, it's legal here, but if from other states, it gives you a sense of how widespread sports betting has become legalized in the United States. So some quick statistics on gambling in Colorado. This was surprising to me. Approximately 38 licensed casinos, 2 tribal casinos, 28 sports books. And what's surprising to me, and it's probably more now, we always joke that when we put together these slideshows, by the next day it's already outdated. 25 sports betting apps. So 25 apps you can get on your phone right now, bet on sports in Colorado. There's some gambling statistics. I'm going to pass this over to Dan.
Thank you. And it's important that we're here. This is a health and wellness fair. This is health and wellness health promotion, wellness, and why are we talking about gambling? Well, if we think about some of the statistics that we start to see, not on this slide per se, but we start to see people who struggle with gambling disorder, because it's a formally recognized disorder according to the DSM from 2013. It's a non-substance related disorder on par with substance use disorder. And we typically will see 61% of people with a gambling problem also have an alcohol use problem. 60% also have a nicotine dependency. You start seeing co-occurrence with mood disorder, bipolar, anxiety, depression. So it's important when we're talking about, 8 dimensions of wellness. And as we're looking at the pact and the compact that was just signed, gambling impacts so many of those. And gambling as an addiction, as a disease model, also has some of the highest financial stresses and pressures to a person, because oftentimes the agent that the person uses is money to fuel their addiction. Yes, Jamie said, gambling is risking kind of something of value. For most people, it's money, it's hard-earned cash. Some people, it's credit cards now. We're starting to see Bitcoin, but it's all that currency use. So that's some of the statistics of why we need to be including gambling as a topic of conversation in all that we do. Our emerging adults are starting to see this more and more from what Jamie highlighted. There are some statistics that you see here, up to 85% of US adults have gambled at least once in their lives. 60% in the past year. We understand in the US that there's a range of anywhere from 1 to 3% of adults have problematic gambling behaviors. 2 to 6% of that, and also problem gambling issues, 2 to 6% are youth. Where do youth learn how to gamble? Let's think about video gaming, which we'll touch on quickly at the end. Jamie's gonna cover that. If you look at the normalization of spending money on games, it starts in adolescence and childhood. You're normalizing the spending of money on games through either loot boxes, prize packs, purchases, and now you have normalized that. And as you move through life with daily fantasy sports as a bonding time with parents, and then sports betting and casino, you're normalizing. There's a continuum there. And that's why it's important that we address all elements and layers. College gambling, college campus, very important. Some elements to consider here. College students are actually 2 times more likely to develop gambling related problems. Part of that is because of brain development, being in a new place, a new time, people, places, and things. Everyone's different. You're experimenting. It's a great age of experimentation, as we know, 18 to 22-year-olds. But we're also starting to see a proliferation of marketing and advertising. Approximately 67%, almost 2/3 of all college students bet on sports. And we're starting to see increased female participation on sports betting as well. We're seeing continued increase in daily fantasy sports. Nearly 30% of all male athletes bet on sports. And if you think about the rules for the NCAA for Division 1, 2, 3, athletes are not allowed to bet on sports. If there's a path to a championship, or if there's a path to professionalism, they are not, by law, by definition, allowed to wager. But we know that rules obviously were meant to be broken, and that's what the athletes attempt to do. If the athlete's not betting on the sport themselves, they have friends who are non-athletes that are placing the bets for them. The work that we have the privilege to do around the state of Colorado is visiting college campuses and talking with both athletes and non-student athletes around why it matters. Rules are one thing, but then what about the relationship with the rule? Relationships matter. Relationships matter across your life. And when you graduate CU and you go on to life and you have to start exploring your relationship with alcohol, with cannabis use, with gambling, with a whole bunch of things, gambling needs to continue to be a part of that conversation. The NCAA released a survey back in the spring of this year, noting that 58% of NCAA students, out of about 3,500 students, had engaged in at least one sports betting activity. 63% of students recalled seeing betting ads. Again, marketing matters. Doesn't have to be a good ad, doesn't have to be a bad ad, they just have to recall seeing the ad and it's done its job. We're starting to see an uptick in what's called in-play wagering. In-play wagering is betting on the next outcome of the game. That is a whole nother layer to the gambling expansion, in the sense that you're reinforcing a bet now every 5, 10, 15 seconds every minute, as opposed to waiting for the outcome of a game, which might last 2 or 3 hours. And so the more you can repeat the behavior and the activity, the more of a habit it can start to form. And now you're starting to form some neural pathway bonds in the person's brain. It starts to become habitual, which for some could develop addiction. I'm not saying it automatically leads to addiction. That's not what we're saying here. It's just under the wrong set of circumstances, giving a whole host of other issues, it could potentially create problems in an individual's life. And I'm one of those individuals whose life was impacted by gambling. And the work that we do and why it resonates so much and why it's so important is when you have a peer-to-peer model, people can sometimes humanize and relate to the story. So I'll share with you just a few moments of my story here, because we have lots to cover in a limited time. But I grew up around gambling my entire life, and what we grow up around as kids, what we grow up around as youth, oftentimes we tend to normalize, internalize, and we put it in our pocket and carry it with us. That's kind of the essence of the adverse childhood experiences, right? The collection of positive and negative impacts and influences on an individual's life. And I was raised in a house where gambling was normal. I was born in 1976, I'm 47 years old. My father drank and gambled every day. When he was drinking, he didn't pay much attention to me, and my mom left when I was 2. So it was my father, my brother, and myself, and I didn't have a mom in my life between 2 and 12 years old. So when my father's drunk on the couch after he'd been working, there wasn't much bonding going on there, but where we bonded was at the racetrack in New Jersey. I mentioned I'm from New Jersey, and we have horse racing there, and that's where I saw a different side of my father. My father would pay attention to me at the racetrack, and as a 12-year-old, my biggest win early on in life from gambling was getting attention from my father. That's all it was. It had nothing to do with money, nothing to do with prizes or gifts. My father paid attention to me at the racetrack. And I thought gambling was the thing that brought families together. That's kind of my backstory of how I was early introduced to it. As I'm going through high school, I'm an athlete, never drank excessively, never took drugs to this day, still a day in my life, just never put it in my system. But the gambling was the one thing that was always kind of bubbling in the background. I was a high school pitcher. I was scouted by the Phillies and the Reds junior year of high school, Major League Baseball. As a lefty, I ended up with a shoulder injury. And what we know and what we talk to athletes about is that an injury can derail your career, but it also leaves a massive void day to day. And for some, if it's career ending, it leaves a void in your life, and you have to almost reinvent yourself. For me, it ruined my baseball dreams, my injury. I had a partially torn rotator cuff, and as a pitcher, that's not good. So I ended up going to college at a Division III school in New Jersey and graduated with a finance and economics degree. I love business, love numbers, always love gambling. Gambling and numbers just kind of go hand in hand. And I ended up getting my first job in New York City in 1998 at an investment bank named Goldman Sachs, downtown New York. And things are going well. I got married in June of 2001, and life is on the right trajectory. Even though baseball didn't work out, I'm using the same competitive personality traits that I have: risk-taking, fear of failure, all the things that propelled me to be fantastic on the diamond also led to a very successful start to my business career. We have these traits in us that do not disappear. We just have to refine them and hone them into a different skill set and use them for the purposes of our current endeavor. And everything's moving along well. And it's June of 2001, we're married, and then everything changed. I always say my baseball injury changed my purpose, my plans, and my goals, but September 11th changed the trajectory of my life. And we're just coming, it's only 3 days ago, even had an option to fly out here on September 11th, and out of principle, I just don't. I was downtown New York that day. I was working in the city, about a 1/10 of a mile to the east of the towers, and I saw the second plane hit the towers. I saw people jumping out of windows. I saw bodies hitting the pavement, and I ended up losing 14 friends that day. I lost 2 more to suicide a month later. So in a span of about a month, I had lost 16 people, 2 of whom were dancing in my wedding just a few months earlier. People I'd gone to college with. And I still to this day still get the chills even thinking about that. And when I'm talking to college students, we're talking to staff, or just kind of sharing like we are now, it's that void in my life. It was the void of loss. It was the inability to communicate, life skills, lack of life skills, lack of coping mechanisms. I used gambling as my outlet. Some people use drugs, some people use alcohol. For me, gambling became the way to deal with all of the tragedy. And on September 12th of 2001, I went on an 8.5-year run of gambling every day on something. I can't tell you how much I always won or lost. I just know that over time it got progressively worse because it can become an addiction. I left Goldman Sachs in New York City in 2003, became a financial planner with Prudential. I was in charge of other people's money. And over time, I started embezzling funds from my clients, started stealing money. I ended up stealing 35 checks from 12 different clients for over $2.1 million. And that all kind of came to a head on February 11th of 2010, where I was caught. The FBI was involved, Attorney General's office in the state of New Jersey, and it ended up leading to an 18-month waiting period before I ended up serving a 6-year prison sentence, for which I served 4.5 years. Gambling for me, from a human element, impacted my entire life. It impacted my kids. I have twins that are now 18, but at the time they were 6 when I went to prison. I had a newborn. You know, I lost my marriage because of the gambling. And it was not because, and I'm not going to say I'm anti-gambling, I'm against gambling for me. I know I don't have a healthy relationship with it. And that's where I use the term relationship. Gambling should be a form of entertainment. Just like going to the movies, just like going out to a nice dinner, it should be done in a manageable, balanced, moderate way. But if you're going back to the ATM, if you're going back and you're taking out credit cards and loans and home equity lines of credit, those are some of the problematic warning signs, especially if you're also lying about it to your friends, which I was often doing. When I came out of prison, I realized I needed to do something different with my life. And I ended up getting my master's in psychology, and I ended up working to help prevent people from falling down the same slippery slope and path that I went on. And to this day, that's my kind of my mission with EPIC. I'm the head of prevention in the US, and we work all around the country from the lens of prevention, and then also with intervention, support, and treatment. Hopefully through that story, you can hear a little bit about, am I going backwards there? No, you can kind of hear through my story the progression of how it started off as no gambling, but then progressed to full-blown clinically diagnosed disordered gambling. And I wish there were some more points along the way at the time, but gambling, we really didn't talk about gambling as an addiction back in 2002, 3 through 2010. It would just be, why are you greedy? Just stop. And it's not that simple. And we don't want our college kids, we don't want college age individuals to be going down that slope. And they're right for it with the marketing and the advertising that they're seeing. I'm gonna turn it back to Jamie right now, who's gonna go through some screens and assessments.
Thank you. And one of our biggest messages for today is we just wanted to be on your radar. You know, there's a lot of great things going on the campus right now. But as I said before, there will be some unintended consequences. And at the fair yesterday, we spoke to a lot of people, and it sounds like for a lot of folks, it's not on the radar. And when we talk about who it needs to be on the radar for, I would say everyone. Because everyone can interface in different ways. We spoke to so many different people from different departments, people who tutored other students, people who are involved in medical issues for students. These issues could come out at any time. Okay, so we just wanted to at least have it be on your radar. We're also in talks with your recovery services folks. We're in talks with your counseling department to provide some further training just on how to assess, how to treat problem gambling. I'm going to cover just briefly some of what we cover with those folks. So gambling disorder, we talked about it, you saw it on the spectrum. If you're familiar with substance use, diagnosis is very similar as far as some of the requirements, but there's definitely a preoccupation where you're really thinking about it a lot. And so when people ask me, what do I look for? They're going to be talking about it. They're going to maybe even have their phones out, maybe even in class when it's supposed to be studying, because they're just obsessed with this idea of gambling. And folks who get to the disorder level are doing it all the time. And so you'll see it, you'll hear it. So, you know, definitely have it on your radar. When they're not gambling, you know, sometimes there's just like this pull to gamble. And so that's where that withdrawal comes from, intolerance. Oftentimes there's a loss of control. And you see that when, you know, they may have controlled spending with their gambling. They take out a certain amount of money to gamble with. They have some significant losses, and then they just get out of control. They gamble all their money. Now they're taking out credit cards. I've worked with folks who've used student loans to gamble with. So that's where that loss of control comes from. And also that chasing. Every person who I've worked with, very similar story. They gamble for a while, they have a big win or a combination of big wins, and then they lose it. And then they just start chasing it because they're confident that some way they'll be able to get that back. And they just dig themselves deeper and deeper and deeper into a hole. The lying involved, gambling to escape. You know, I find that there's two types of gamblers. Gamblers who turn on these positive feelings, the endorphins, you know, the adrenaline. And then gamblers who are just turning off negative feelings, so they're escaping to gamble. Sometimes it's a combination of the two. Risking significant relationships. It's usually prompted by a partner or a parent to seek treatment. And so when I ask people, well, what probably got you to the point where you're seeking treatment? Oftentimes it's a partner or a parent that says, hey, it's gotten out of control, you need to get help. And then oftentimes there's bailouts involved too. People have lost a lot of money, and then someone rescues them in some way. So why do we screen? And, I think this is really important on this campus, in your counseling department, with your recovery folks. We do need to have some level of process to screen for this. We need to be asking the question, because you don't know unless you ask, right? So we need to be asking those questions. Oftentimes, when I speak to colleges and universities, they screen for drugs, they screen for alcohol, but we're not screening for gambling addiction. Gambling hits all demographic groups, so it affects everyone, could affect everyone. Gambling problems, high co-occurring rates, and so what I mean by that is, oftentimes gambling is not the main reason why people are seeking treatment. They're seeking treatment for depression, for anxiety, for substance use. But one way that they use to treat themselves, to self-medicate, is through gambling, okay? So it may not be the primary issue they're coming to treatment, but it may be something that needs to be addressed in treatment. And then gambling, most people don't know this, but gambling is the addiction with the highest rate of suicide. So it's really important to know that, to be able to identify people who are struggling with this and give them the right type of treatment. Okay, let's not just give them a generalized approach to treatment, because it may or may not be effective. It needs to be specialized. So here are some simple questions that folks may consider when they're assessing somebody who is struggling with a potential gambling problem. I oftentimes will tell people, well, just ask, do you feel like you have a gambling problem? Sometimes we ask these like tricky questions to try to find out in different ways, but sometimes just ask, do you feel like you have a gambling problem? That's not the only question you should ask, but sometimes just by asking that question, by what they say or how they respond, I think it's really important too. So if they think about it for a little bit, that also might give you an indication that they may have a gambling problem. So how do we treat gambling disorder? So we treat a lot of different ways. And I mentioned early on that I was treating folks with gambling issues for a while, and I think I was generally effective, but I was missing out on a few things. And really, it was about time, access, and money. Okay, and I think I did a pretty good job talking to people who struggle with gambling about time. So if you're not gambling, how are you using your time instead? Let's fill your life with things that are fulfilling for you, things that are healthy. 8 dimensions of wellness, I'm very familiar with that. Let's take a look at those 8 dimensions of wellness for you, and let's fill all of those different areas. And then, for some people it's exercise. And for some people, it's addressing their recovery through podcasts, through books, maybe through GA meetings. But let's not take, for people who are struggling with gambling, sometimes they're spending 4 or 5 hours a day. Let's not take that 4 or 5 hours away and not fill it with something else. And then we have access. And for some people, they need to have their access limited. And so there's a couple different ways that you can do that. There's game blocking software, which can be effective, especially if they're gambling on their phones. Self-exclusion, where in the state of Colorado, you can be put on a list, which prevents you from going to a casino. But if it's a software, it prevents you from being able to use that software. And then what my favorite is the relational accountability. And so who in your life can help hold you accountable? Is it your partner? Is it a parent? Is it a friend? I feel like relational, I've seen, as far as effectiveness, I've seen relational accountability work the best. If you have the right person in your life that's gonna help hold you accountable, and you listen to them, and you spend time with them, I think that one can be the most effective. And then money. So I'm a therapist, and for a long time, I'm like, I don't talk about money. We'll talk about feelings, I don't talk about money. But if you are someone who's treating gambling addiction, you have to have conversations about money. And you may have to get them connected to a financial therapist. You may have to work with them on education planning. You may have to come up with what's called a restitution plan. You have this big hole of debt now that you have to pay back, and let's talk about that. How are you going to do that? And then for some people, they need some level of financial oversight as well, having other people have access to your bank account, and so they can see how you're spending your money.
Yeah, and just to add on the money aspect, for a person with a gambling problem, money changes value. You lose the value of $1 when you have a gambling problem. You're so quick to put a credit card on file. You're so quick to spend hundreds or thousands of dollars. That's a mortgage payment. That's 2 mortgage payments, So it changes value when you're in a casino. You have the left pocket and right pocket. I'm only gonna gamble with the money here, and then when I win, I'm gonna put it over here, and then you start playing all these little mental games around money. But a person with a gambling problem loses the value of a dollar. So even in therapy or as a spouse, one of the first things that we always say to do is order copies of those credit reports. That'll give you a total overview of a financial condition of a person based on their social security number. You'll find out which cards are open, if there's loans against home equity, lines of credit, et cetera. And that'll start the process of kind of financial healing as well.
Yeah. And as a therapist, I tell my clients, I'm gonna be all up in your business, okay? Because that's what it takes. And there's a certain level of intrusiveness to that, but that's, that's what it takes. I would like to believe all my clients and everything that they tell me, but they lie to me sometimes. And so, we're gonna have to check and verify some of the things that they're saying. So other strategies, if you're a therapist, you're familiar with these, so there's definitely harm and risk reduction, and so we recognize that for some folks, they're going to continue to gamble. So how do you do that in the least risky way? And there's a lot of strategies around that. Motivational interviewing and cognitive behavioral therapy continues to be other strategies that can be effective. So, and then just briefly, we have a lot of folks who may not have participated in gambling. They are participating in gambling, but they don't think they're gambling, but they're gaming. And as you can see, we talked about the DSM diagnosis criteria earlier, very similar with gaming. This preoccupation, withdrawal, loss of control. I also work with people with gaming addictions or screen addictions, and the traits are very similar. And for some people, it starts off with gaming, and then it transitions, because even with gaming, there's a lot of ads and different ways to kind of pull your attention and pull your money. So sometimes it starts with gaming and then turns into more like, traditional gambling. And then there's just been a gamification of video games. And, this scares me to death, because I have a son who's 6 years old who plays some of the games that have these things, these loot boxes, the earning progressions, and you risk something because you're hoping to get something in return. Optional purchases is another one. A lot of games right now, you just get on your phone, my son wants to download these games all the time. Most of them are free. I'm like, oh, awesome, another free game. But it's not. They get their money. Let me tell you, they get their money some way. And, there's gifts, entry fees, all different types of ways. But again, going back to the definition of gambling, risking something with hopes of something in return. I think about, I talked about Dave & Buster earlier, and not to pick on that company specifically, because a lot of companies like that. That's gambling. They're playing all these different games, and they're I'm spending, it's not their money, $20, $30 for them to play these games in hopes to get tickets so they can buy this, cheap toy. That's probably worth 50 cents. And so we just need to be thoughtful of that and just be really, really careful and cognizant as to how we navigate that. And just some considerations in gaming and gambling are very similar. And you see at the bottom there, gamblers equals gamers, gamers equals gamblers. The psychology is the same. So part of why we're here is we just want you to know what your resources are. There are a lot of resources throughout the country, but also locally. One that I want to highlight, the Colorado Problem Gambling Center, is located in Lakewood. One of the next slides here, I'm going to have a QR code that'll take you right to the website. I've noticed that there are a couple of therapists on the meeting here. We do have a training scholarship for therapists, mental health professionals who want to become certified in problem gambling. It's completely free to you. It's a couple $1,000 value, $600 training, ongoing supervision, and you can work towards certification to be an expert in working with people who struggle with problem gambling. I always encourage larger entities, CU being one of those, that you have a couple experts on your campus that really know how to deal with this issue and can be the on-site expert for problem gambling. You have local experts, but if you had someone on campus right here that's easily accessible, I think that would be valuable to your university. We have an upcoming fall symposium You may recognize a couple of those heads up there, but you all are invited to that, your student, your staff. It's just a great couple of days where we're gonna take a look at youth problem gambling, sports betting, half a day on Thursday the 5th and a full day on the 6th. And then we have ongoing webinars as well. These are completely free. It says to register, but you actually don't have to register. If you go to this QR code, it'll take you to our website where you can have access to resources. You can register for the symposium. You can register for the webinar. And we'd love to see you. And again, part of our message, part of the reason why we're here is just to have it on your radar and let you know that there are resources available to you.
Yeah, and just to kind of drive home a little bit more, why this matters so much on the college campus, I'll share a little anecdote. I had the privilege of spending some time down in Central Arkansas with some of the athletics teams down there and some of the students and student athletes. And I was doing a session with women's soccer. And after the session, young girl comes down, 18, she's a freshman, she had transferred, she was from Canada originally, going to school down there on the soccer program on scholarship. And she had just asked, can I talk to you privately for a little bit? I said, sure. So we talked off to the side. And she said, I've never heard someone talk about gambling before like this. She goes, my mom has a massive gambling problem and I don't know who to talk to about it. And so while we're talking about gambling on college campuses, yes, we're concerned that it could be our students. We're concerned it could be faculty and staff. But let's not also forget that a lot of the students that are on your campuses all around the state of Colorado also have family members back home. They have aunts, uncles, grandparents, parents, some of whom might be struggling with gambling as well. And the students coming to school every day, not knowing what this thing is, why their parents are angry, or there's not enough money to pay for tuition, or whatever you're going through, some of the warning signs that you just saw. And so the students carrying that baggage, that heavy baggage around on their back throughout the day. So sometimes the session and the lessons that we're teaching can help be applicable for someone to say, oh my gosh, that sounds like something I'm going through now. Because this girl had a mom who was struggling with gambling. And when I talked to the soccer coach afterwards and I explained to her the situation, the soccer coach looked at me and said, I never would have guessed gambling was an issue. She said, I had no idea. This girl, when we recruited her and scouted her, she was a tremendous player, but lately she has not been performing up to task. She's been a bit slower. She doesn't seem interested. She's late for practice. Her grades have started off a little on the downside. And we just assumed it was a transition period. We just assumed it was a boyfriend issue. That's all. That's what we assume. Things that we understand is what we tend to gravitate towards. And the soccer coach said, I never, ever would have guessed that there was gambling going on. And thankfully, the mom ended up getting the help and the support she needed. Because this girl also had a 3-year-old sister living with her mom, and she was worried because they were supposed to lose their house in the next month because of the gambling. The house was saved, the mom got into treatment, and this girl is still at Central Arkansas. And it's the education and awareness, and this is why we need to talk about gambling as a part of the conversation when we're talking about addiction, mental health, performance, because this is a growing and potentially growing public health issue. Don't want to use the word crisis, but this is definitely a public health concern that is growing and needs to be addressed. So we appreciate the opportunity to be here today. There is another QR code. We just love hitting you with QR codes for scanning, because what's interesting is that with gambling in the United States, there's no federal database. There's no federal survey or research funding. It's all done at the state level, and it's done through partners or charitable organizations. So as much data as we collect, boots on the ground, we can kind of help inform policy, inform education, continue to grow and expand knowledge base. So it's important that we collect data whenever we can, and it's fully anonymized. We're not getting any personal information. You're not going to end up on some random distribution list getting a diaper sent to your house for some odd reason. So it's just so we can understand what your takeaways are, what's of interest, what you like, what you want to learn more about, anything along those lines. It's important because we do need to do more work on the federal level. We do a great job of educating on stranger danger, drugs, alcohol, all very important things, but we don't ask enough questions. To Jamie's point earlier, if we don't ask, we don't know. And so it's important that we ask the questions. So Thank you very much for being here today, and Jane, I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah, one more QR code. This is from the institution, and so if you all could do this as well.
you, right?
Yep, and, yeah, we're just grateful to be here. Any chance that we get to be on a college campus, we take advantage of it, no matter how large or how small the audience, and, we're just thankful to be here and happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
Yeah, if there's any questions in the chat, or if there's anything going on there.
No questions in, let me see. All right. We have, thank you for this, and Dan for sharing your story. I knew barely anything about gambling coming into this, so this has been so educational, and thank you, Dan, for being vulnerable and sharing your story.
Great,
I
awesome.
don't see any other questions, so any other questions, anyone? Questions? No?